Right. Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Hoyun Kim from ExecOnline, the Chief Human Resources Officer and Chief Legal Officer at ExecOnline. Very excited to have her here to share her stories from the HR Frontline. So just wanted to start off, Hoyun, and just ask you, how are you doing, at this stage of our post-COVID, post-multiple crisis world?
Well, I'm doing well. I think right now there are many qualifiers, right, to answering that question.
So let me, kind of jump in then, and just kind of ask, at this point, we're kind of finally, kind of moving into that reopening phase of the crisis. There's a lot of uncertainty. So how are you approaching, reopening given all the uncertainty out there right now?
Yeah, I would say that, most companies started this conversation about reopening their offices probably, a little over a month ago, where the conversations were starting to get real serious as states started to publicize when they might target in terms of dates for reopening. And that planning follows so many different paths, right? You have the legal path of regulatory concerns about protecting the work environment and privacy when you talk about things like contact tracing and testing. So you have the whole, a myriad of legal concerns that you have to really consider. And then, of course, on the HR side, there, health and safety, concern about people's families. We're also aware that we have different demographics within our company. So there are people with young children. The states may be ready to announce that businesses are safe to return to their offices ahead of when schools are ready to make that announcement. So how do we deal with those kinds of things? So that conversation has been happening. And I think right now the best thing we can do is to really be aware and see where how states are moving, how cities are moving, and also how offices are moving in terms of creating different structures to protect health and safety. So there are a lot of different parts to this. And for us, it's not so, we don't have an immediate need to go back to the office. And of course, we were already much more prepared than many companies for going remote because 25% of our employees were already remote. So there isn't anything that is sort of external that would drive us to go into the office any earlier than it's safe to do so.
What are your, thoughts as you think about, challenges, as reopening happens?
Yeah, I think definitely one of the challenges is companies getting to a comfort level with feeling like they understand all of the regulatory concerns and they're ready to kind of instruct the company to move forward with their plans. And like us, many companies have open office floor plans, for instance, and how are they going to navigate that? And are building managers preparing us for that? And so just sort of those logistical points that have to be addressed. And then, as I said, the different demographics you have within your company. Mm-hmm. And, the other part of it is that, many people, and this has been written about a lot, have discovered that working from home works really well. And in some cases, better than working in the office, without the distraction of the work environment. Some people are finding that they're more productive. And so there's a lot to be said for the benefits of working from home. And so how does that play into the planning? You have to consider some things went quite well in the work from home environment. And so how do you deploy something that may be more creative than just everybody goes back, to life before, right?
Prior to this interview, I know we had talked a little bit about how, there's a lot out there around how formal HR, really, needs to change, in response to the crisis. But you had a lot of thoughts around what needs to change informally, within organizations. Can you elaborate on that and just kind of share, what you think the needs are informally?
Yeah, so I think some of this is already happening organically, right? And so it's not necessarily driven by, top level management or even HR teams. As we've been working remotely and got settled into it, I think people start to miss that intimacy of being in the in-person environment with their colleagues. And so we found, I think this will resonate for you, that in the beginning when we were doing all our meetings on video, it was much like our meetings had always been on video. We do a lot of video meetings. We've always done a lot of video meetings because that's our culture. But as time went on, people started to try to find sort of substitutes for the intimacy that you find working in a physical environment with your colleagues. And so more and more these meetings start to get less and less formal. And so in the beginning, we spent a lot of time kind of chatting and talking about how we're doing. A little bit of that, the water cooler talk that isn't happening in the office now is happening over video. So there is a lot of a little more kind of intimacy, I would say. And also you're getting a view into people's private lives because they're with their families, they're in their homes. And so some of it is happening organically. And also people, I think, are starting to feel a yearning for those interactions that are unexpected and unplanned and unscheduled. And so I think that's going to lead to kind of different kinds of interactions, not just with HR teams, but just widely throughout the company. And we also know that due to the experiences of having to react so fast to the COVID-19 situation, that HR really needs to be nimble. Needs to be very nimble and ready to provide guidance in situations of crises like never before, because it's not just this pandemic. There may be other situations, other epidemics, other crisis situations that we need to respond to. And you can't be both nimble and terribly formal at the same time, right? So you have to be able to respond in the moment. And really, people are worrying. I mean, I think one of the things that HR people and other companies too that I've spoken with, dealing with the emotional impact was very challenging for people because they're not necessarily used to doing that on such a wide scale. Like you might have situations, but not where the company as a whole is concerned about the world and what's happening in their cities and in their communities, right? And so that takes a certain kind of emotional intelligence and social awareness, right? And so, you might find that in the future, there's going to be a little more focus on hiring people in HR who have those kinds of attributes.
What should people be thinking about right now as they're thinking about their careers?
It's been interesting that it's 3 months since our company has started working remotely, and that first level of that adaptation has happened, right? People, and that focus was on how do we continue doing our jobs without skipping a beat. But I think then there's that second level, right, where now people are starting to go, what is still missing from their work life, right? Where are those serendipitous interactions, the moments of inspiration, the unplanned conversation that happens because you bumped into somebody and that turns into a great idea, the things that bring you joy and also just the relationship with your colleagues that are working in the same space with you. And there is a certain extent to which when you're working in a in-person environment, you get credit for just showing up. Showing up is just already you're there, right? You're visible. And so I think people are thinking about, how am I showing up? What does that mean now in this virtual environment? And so I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have, if you're mentoring people with your mentees, and if you're sort of more, newer in your career, think about how you can show up. And that's beyond sort of the confines of doing your everyday job. How are you making a difference to other people in the company, your relationships within the company? And if you're a more senior professional, who are you taking under your wings? Every successful person has a story about somebody who made a real difference in their lives because they took an interest in you and your career. And oftentimes it's not somebody who's formally assigned that role, right? I mean, there's a place for formal mentorships, but then there's, I think, a great place for informal mentors who just take an interest. And, are you doing that for somebody? Is there somebody you're noticing who has talent or who reminds you of your earlier self when you were starting out, who you can take under your wings? It's a lot easier in the in-person environment because those people are sitting there right next to you, right? Here, how do we replicate that? And I think that's an interesting thing for people to think about, because it also is what makes people like us who are more senior, it makes our job more enjoyable too, to have some influence over people's careers who are just starting out.
So I love the point about, taking on, the task of really reaching out and thinking about who you can mentor, as part of it. Any other advice that you would give around that?
Yeah, I think you can really kind of reduce it to sort of the everyday, right? And so as I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago, I kind of set a challenge for myself to call one person every day who wasn't expecting to hear from me, just to see what that felt. The old days, that's what we did, right? We picked up the phone. So everything old is new again. And the video is great, but I think, we've read about how some people are starting to experience video fatigue, too many video meetings. How about just pick up the phone and call somebody and say hello with no particular agenda, right? And you can do that for people outside the company as well. But I think that, when I've called people, they've sort of been pleasantly surprised. Once they get over the suspicion that it might be about something serious, they're very surprised to hear from me. And always there's something interesting they have to convey, or some experience, or even some worry that they wanted to, but they didn't feel like it was worthy of a phone call. But now you're on the line and you're there and present for that person. And so I think, it can be pretty simple. It doesn't have to be some complex plan. You can build it into your day.
We've had the COVID-19 crisis. We've had, the crisis around, the broader economy. There's a third crisis that has now, happened. And how have, at ExecOnline, with the murder of George Floyd, how has ExecOnline really responded to, this crisis as well?
In our case, with our company, people started to respond pretty immediately. And I felt that it was a positive thing that employees felt very comfortable reaching out to everybody. Employees were talking amongst themselves. They were reaching out to HR, saying, what are we going to do? And we were actively talking about the senior management team, but employees were sort of almost ahead of us and thinking about, what can we do? How can we be active? And how can we voice our position about this issue, right? And which was really great, because that led to our planning a town hall meeting, as you know, and people were able to express their feelings, but also really suggest ways that the company can take action to support Black Lives Matter and other institutions that are addressing racial injustice, right? So I thought this was a really great example of inclusion at its best. You can have formal, diversity and inclusion initiatives in your company. And of course, it starts with inclusion, because inclusion is what creates the drive, creates the engine to create more diversity. But I think, sometimes with well-meaning, companies and HR teams can provide certain programs for inclusion and invite people to step through it, but people aren't necessarily going to step through it, right? I mean, individuals always think, what is the risk for me? What is the benefit for me? You can put out a welcome mat, but it has to be sincere. It has to be real. And I think this was such a real moment for everybody and for our company, and people felt moved. And so I think at the town hall, we saw people spoke who normally wouldn't speak at our all hands meetings, and were very moved, and I think trusting their colleagues that they're sharing these intimate feelings and trusting us to hold that in that way. And so I think, it led me to believe that when you're trying to develop initiatives around inclusion, that what really gets people to step through that door is a sense of mission, right? A sense of mission and passion. And I think right now, on the other side of the town hall and the statements that we've put out and the contributions we want to make to organizations, there's a real strong desire to continue that conversation and continue to act.
Where do you think learning and development fits in, and how would you think about that, within the broader context of the crises we've had?
I think there's a sense of when we're dealing with crises, when we're dealing with a very fast changing world, that immediacy is really important. And we can take a lesson, and this is interesting that I would say this, because I haven't found that the legal community has always been great at creating immediacy around learning. Being legal, there's a tendency to sort of see how trends play out, assess it, and then develop learnings on that, right? But here, all of those things were happening simultaneously, right? But in the legal community, as we were addressing COVID, things were happening in a very fluid, rapid, kind of as they were happening way. And so I participated in many webinars and panels where we talked about COVID-19. There's a sort of an intersection with HR and legal, and a willingness to share learnings in sort of an open source type of way. I think that's going to be, something that we want to look to in the future. The immediacy is really important. I mean, we're having that conversation about how fast the markets change and how fast economies change. And so you have to be to accelerate change. And I think it was a very good example of that during this COVID period.
What sort of impacts do you see kind of coming out of this for HR, out of these crises?
Well, I do hope that that people saw how important the HR function is in times like this. To me, because I'm on the senior management team as representative of legal and HR, I feel that I have a voice in both those areas. I know in some companies that is something that is developing, and I think this crisis really highlighted how important it is that HR have that voice, because HR is who individual employees turn to in times of crisis, right? And so we need to have the tools to not only engage with the employees, but also be there in the strategy and planning phases when the company is planning around these kinds of events and changes. And so I think that's one. And the other, which point I made earlier, is that, what type of people are you hiring into the HR function? And one of them is people who are more astute emotionally, socially. That's very important. But also people who have strong points of view and people who want to operate out of the administrative box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, and that's a great place to end, the need to operate outside of the administrative box. So thank you very much, Hoyun, for joining us for Stories from the HR Frontline. It was great to talk to you today.